Let's pray. Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. My wife Sasha and I have very different experiences of heritage. My sense of heritage is focused mainly on genealogy, and it tends to be very intellectual and often focused on, frankly, certain men of distinction. There's an autobiography from one of my great-great-grandfathers on the table there. The books I'm sharing on the table, those white spiral-bound books, are copies of what we call in my family the green books, which are these hard-bound, detailed genealogical records tracing our ancestry back to John Harris, born in Wiltshire, England in 1680, and John Smith, born in 1655 in County Monaghan in Ireland, which I'm sure is not how you say that with an Irish accent. In my mom's apartment, there is a set of 4 pictures of 4 Harris men from way, way, way back. And my dad would look at those and say that they were the GAAs, God-awful ancestors. In my grandparents' home, and then my parents', and now in my brother's home, there's a painting of purportedly another ancestor of ours, but there's also question about this, whether we really have any relation to this person at all. It's called MacDonald at Glencoe. Massacre of Glencoe as a massacre of the English against the Scottish clan, a real betrayal, and lots of drama in that story. And this is a picture of a guy in a kilt. And I think he's got a sword in one hand, and he's like got a damsel in distress in another hand. And he's like facing the onslaught of some army with Scottish deer hounds at his side. And they're like, I guess that's part of who I am as well. I don't know what to do with that. The first Harris to come to the colonies before the Revolution was named Thomas Harris, my namesake, and his grave can be found at the Great Valley Presbyterian Church Cemetery outside of Philadelphia. And by the way, there's not an unbroken line of Presbyterians since the Revolution in my family. It's kind of a coincidence, but that's another story. At that cemetery, there's also maybe 20 more Harris ancestors buried there. And I know that that's a real gift, to be able to look that far back at your genealogy, to know all of that information, to be able to have that sacred ground where your ancestors are buried. Yet also, a lot of our heritage seems to be mostly documentation. Any richness or distinctiveness has been lost over the generations, has dissipated, has gotten watered down. Our family has thoroughly melted into the American melting pot of the white culture, so that we have no really distinctive heritage related to language or music or food. My heritage related to language is just an unhealthy anxiety about ending a sentence with a preposition, which Jim Gibbons in the first service, who's an editor, said that's okay now. And so I need to work on that. That's what the sermon's about, in fact, is helping me deal with my unhealthy anxiety about ending a sentence with a preposition. My food heritage is hot dogs and hamburgers with lots of ketchup. So Sasha, on the other hand, knows very little about her genealogy beyond just a few generations back, but she has a living cultural heritage. She has a strong and rich heritage that represents a beautiful diversity of people that she still has memories of and knows. Both her parents were born in Argentina and immigrated to the US as young adults and met here. Her father's side of the family had immigrated to Argentina from Italy and from the Basque region of Spain, which is not the same as Spain. And you don't tell a Basque person that they're from Spain. So there's that intensity and distinctiveness of her identity. Her mother's side were Ashkenazi Jews who fled the pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe and fled to Argentina. Her mother's mother was Bobe. Bobe was raised as a little girl in Argentina by Eastern European and Russian Jews. And eventually Bobe immigrated to the US with Sasha's mother and her aunts and uncles when they were young. And I first met Bobe when Sasha and I were first dating. Bobby lived in a tiny Manhattan apartment where she would cook the most amazing food from scratch that combined Jewish and Italian and Argentinian influences. She would leave her apartment door cracked open, and as soon as you entered the building, you could smell her cooking. You knew that everybody on the whole floor knew that Bobby was cooking. Sasha's favorites were empanadas and raviolis and gnocchis, all made from scratch, including the dough. And watching Bobby make this dough was amazing. It would take me 2 hours to do what she does in like 10 minutes. She just poured a lump of flour, a pile of flour on a counter, not even a bowl, put a depression in, cracked an egg, put some water, zip, 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 and she had this ball of dough that she rolled out and started cutting into different things. She also had a candle on her kitchen table that she would light as part of her Jewish spirituality every Sabbath, even though she didn't really go to synagogue, but she still lit that candle every week. She would slip into speaking Spanish whenever she needed to say something important. And so she and Sasha would speak in Spanish, and I would just kind of sit there eating her delicious food and wondering why they were laughing at me. And, and occasionally she'd even sprinkle in some Yiddish to what she would say. And that's just one person in Sasha's beautiful heritage. And so she carries that with her. She carries that heritage of language and food and spirituality. Even how she expresses herself, her emotions and her anger, her disappointment. We know exactly what Sasha's feeling at all times just by looking at her, which is very different than my white Anglo-Saxon Protestant heritage, which says, push it all down, be stoic, don't show anybody what you're feeling. And so it took me a while to get used to that in my marriage. So how we express or don't express our emotions can be part of our heritage. It can mean so many things. It can inform what we eat, what we listen to, how we talk, the stories we tell, how we encounter the divine, how we relate to each other. And some of us can relate to our heritage in different ways as well. We can be proud of it, or maybe we carry it as a burden. Maybe we feel guilty that we're not honoring or passing on our heritage like we should be. Or maybe we see some parts of our heritage as embarrassing or shameful. Or our heritage may include generational trauma. If your ancestors were enslaved or forcibly displaced, that trauma lasts for generations. There's evidence that that trauma can be coded into our DNA that's passed on from one generation to the next. There's families that have a history of addiction or mental illness or family dysfunction or generational grudges that all kind of filter down and we receive as part of our heritage. The word heritage comes from the same root as inheritance and heir. It's what we receive from our ancestors, whether it's good and beautiful or bad and ugly. When the prophet Isaiah envisions a day when all people come together and acknowledge the sovereignty of God, we may find it surprising that he envisions this as nations coming together. The nations will come to the mountain of God, not individuals, not all the people of the earth, but the nations will come. Today, when we think of nationalism, we probably think of the source of so much harm in the world, so much evil, one nation believing they're superior to another, one nation believing that another shouldn't even exist. How can it be that on that day when we all acknowledge God as the ultimate ruler, that nations will still be around? They'll still be something. Won't that day be a time when we put aside all of those differences and stand before God as one human family? And maybe, we don't know exactly what that day will be like, but Isaiah's vision suggests that on that day, the diverse and beautiful cultures of the world will remain diverse and beautiful. The nations are still nations as they stand at the foot of the mountain of God. This suggests, of course, that our cultural heritages are not bad at all, that our culture and our ethnic identity and even our national identities can be good things. I mean, our species, Homo sapiens, are incredibly adaptable creatures. And as we spread out across the globe at the dawn of our species, we were adapting to every new place that we went. And so we learned what we could eat in a new place and what was delicious and what was disgusting and what was dangerous. And more importantly, we learned that we could cook things in certain ways so that something that was dangerous became something that was delicious. And that's not knowledge that we are born with. That is knowledge that we carry with us as a community, as a people that gets passed down from generation to generation. We don't have instincts as Homo sapiens, we have culture. It defines us as a species. Our language changed and evolved as we moved around the earth so that Inuit people have their 100 different words for snow, and people in the rainforest probably have 100 different words for rain. We have an incredibly diverse way of organizing our families and our communities together. And our sense of the divine, our sense of the transcendent is different around the globe. And that probably comes ultimately from the landscape that we saw. Were we by a mountain or by the sea or in the plains or in the jungle? What kind of animals were around us? That all shaped and informed how we related to that which was greater and larger than we. So then, why on that day, when we all finally learn to follow God's path of selfless love for one another, would we ever need to put aside the beautiful cultural expressions of our humanity? Why, when we come together to acknowledge God as the ultimate judge of humankind, would we forget the things that shaped us? Why, when we realize that we all must respect the dignity and worth of every individual person, would we fail to respect the cultures that made them who they are? So indeed, Isaiah's vision embraces our different heritages, even as he calls us to be that one human family with God as our ultimate divine parent. And yet, in Isaiah's utopian vision, the people still have work to do. There are swords in their hands that need to be beaten into plowshares. There are spears that need to be beaten into pruning hooks. Heritage and culture, as surely as they can be beautiful things, can also pass on harmful things, harmful ideas about other people, harmful prejudices, harmful beliefs about ourselves, harmful ways of being together. We all carry with us an inheritance of harming one another and harming ourselves. We learn from our ancestors how to do that harm very effectively. Maybe we have a heritage of addiction, and maybe we have a heritage of intolerance or even hatred towards others. We may inherit a certain way of raising our children or treating our children that is not healthy or good. We may inherit ways of eating that are not healthy. They might be delicious, but they're not healthy. We may inherit beliefs about our bodies that are shameful, or our sexuality as shameful. We may carry with us spiritual beliefs that are unhealthy and ultimately hold us back from a deeper relationship with God and one another. And so even as we are called together to gather at the mountain of God, bringing with us the best of who we are as people, we're also called to get out the hammer and start the work of transforming the unhealthy parts of our heritage into new things that are useful and productive, which is going to be hard work. Isaiah makes it sound easy. You're just going to beat those swords into plowshares and those prunes and those spears into pruning hooks. Well, you can't just beat a sword into a plowshare with a hammer. You need some heat, you need some fire, and you need a furnace. You need to break down that sword into its elemental form and then start the hard work of reshaping it and refining it into something good and something of benefit. Personal transformation and generational change is hard work. It's honest and deep and vulnerable work that we are all called to do. And we need the fire of faith, and we need the furnace of the faith community to help us do that work. We need to trust that if we change the parts of ourselves that are toxic, we're not going to lose who we are. We've come to depend on certain ways of being that are harmful, and we think that if we change those or let those go, who will we be? And so we come into a loving faith community that holds us and lifts us and carries us while we do that work. We don't change the negative parts of ourselves and our heritage overnight. We change those things over years. Years of living in the loving, accepting fires of a community, years of hearing that we can do better than our parents or our grandparents, years of hammering out the sharp edges that harm and forming and reshaping those into tools of goodness. The goal of standing at the mountain of God with not swords and spears, but only with plowshares and only with pruning hooks. That's the work of a lifetime. It's the work of generations. We have all inherited wonderful gifts from our ancestors. We are beautiful people who come from beautiful people. We are invited to come to the mountain of God, bringing our uniqueness, bringing our distinctiveness and the best parts of our heritage. And we're called also to discern the parts of our heritage that are harmful to others and harmful to us. And so now here, in the furnace of this faith community, in the fires of honesty and love, we must create new ways of being, new ways of thinking and believing and acting in the world, so that one day we all will stand at the foot of the mountain of God. We will be surrounded by the awesome, diverse tapestry of the human family, who are not holding swords and spears, but plowshares and pruning hooks, ready to put these tools to work for the benefit of everyone. Amen.